Hello everybody, and welcome to another late night Purblind Gamer bonus stream. I suppose I should start calling these Purblind Reader. This video can't change your name back and forth for one stream only. But I hope everybody's having a good day so far. Welcome in Vlomosel. Am I saying that right? And Techie Rob. You guys should check out Techie Rob, who is a retro streamer with a fondness for Sega and has been playing through the Strike series. Well, some of them anyway. Don't know if we'll get as far as Surgical Strike or Lucky Strike Bowling. But yeah, I hope everybody's week is off to a good start. I ended up not getting home until fairly late. And then I was like, I've still got enough energy, and I did say I would try to do one of these bonus streams this week, so might as well try it and do it tonight, before things happen in the rest of the week to thoroughly exhaust me, as seems to happen. Work. Thank you to everybody who came out to my last couple of streams. On Sunday, which would be yesterday, we played more Blackwell Epiphany. It got a little bit weird. Not too much. And on Saturday we played several games for Short Horror Saturday. I think the Incident at Grove Lake was my favorite one we played that day. Yeah, realize we were doing a stream several days in a row, or almost. Not tomorrow, but we will again Wednesday. But I suppose that makes up for a couple of the streams I've missed. Besides, I do want to get through this book. Oh, you're welcome, Techie Rob. My pleasure. I don't know, after tonight, maybe 3 or 4 more streams, it will be finished, because we're just about page 200, and it's just about 325 pages. Yeah, kind of trying to break it up by uniform number of chapters per stream, but it's one of those books that chapters vary a fair bit in length. Yeah. Certainly an interesting book. A lot going on. Yeah, no real announcements since I just streamed yesterday, but just as a reminder, the community challenge is live, and forgot to post tonight's stream announcement on MySpace again. I don't know why I still bother with MySpace. Maybe in the near future I won't. And I believe where we were, the Armstrong family is going to be arriving soon, and they know that their daughter Louise is there, and still don't know who killed their estranged son Arnold, or who was responsible for stealing money and causing the bank to fail, or who the various intruders of the house are. And yeah, some people are trying to get Miss Innes and her niece and nephew, whom she has raised, to leave the house at this point. And yes, Thomas, the old servant, was recently found dead. Apparently, he was frightened to death and his heart gave out. And Jamieson, the detective, is still sniffing around for answers. And I'm leaving about 9/10 of everything that's going on. But that's okay. Let's continue with chapter 21. Chapter 21. 14 Elm Street. It was Monday evening when we found the body of poor old Thomas. Monday night had been uneventful. Things were quiet at the house, and the peculiar circumstances of the old man's death had been carefully kept from the servants. Rosie took charge of the dining room and pantry, in the absence of a butler, and, except for the warning of the Casanova doctor, everything breathed of peace. Affiliates at the Traders' Bank were progressing slowly. The failure had hit small stockholders very hard, the minister of the little Methodist chapel in Casanova among them. He had received as a legacy from an uncle a few shares of stock in the Traders' Bank, and now his joy was turned to bitterness. He had to sacrifice everything he had in the world, and his feeling against Paul Armstrong, dead as he was, must have been bitter in the extreme. He was asked to officiate at the simple services when the dead banker's body was interred in Casanova churchyard, but the good man providentially took cold, and a substitute was called in. A few days after the services he called to see me, a kind-faced little man, in a very bad frock-coat and laundered tie. I think he was uncertain as to my connection with the Armstrong family, and dubious whether I considered Mr. Armstrong's taking away a matter for condolence or congratulations. He was not long in doubt. I liked the little man. He had known Thomas well, and had promised to officiate at the services in the rickety African Zion church. He told me more of himself than he knew, and before he left I astonished him, and myself, I admit, by promising a new carpet for his church. He was much affected, and I gathered that he had yearned over his ragged chapel as a mother over a half-clothed child. "You are laying up treasure, Miss Innes," he said brokenly, "where neither moth nor rust corrupt, nor thieves break through and steal." "It is certainly a safer place than Sunnyside," I admitted, and the thought of the carpet permitted him to smile. He stood just inside the doorway, looking from the luxury of the house to the beauty of the view. "The rich ought to be good," he said wistfully. "They have so much that is beautiful, and beauty is ennobling. And yet, while I ought to say nothing but good of the dead, Mr. Armstrong saw nothing of this fair prospect. To him these trees and lawns were not the work of God, they were property, at so much an acre. He loved money, Miss Innes. He offered up everything to his golden calf. Not power, not ambition was his fetish. It was money." Then he dropped his pulpit manner, and, turning to me with his engaging smile, "In spite of all this luxury," he said, "the country people here have a saying that Mr. Paul Armstrong could sit on $1 and see all around it. Unlike the summer people, he gave neither to the poor nor to the church. He loved money for its own sake." "And there are no pockets in shrouds," I said cynically. I sent him home in the car with a bunch of hothouse roses for his wife, and he was quite overwhelmed. As for me, I had a generous glow that was cheap at the price of a church carpet. I received less gratification and less gratitude when I presented the new silver communion set to St. Barnabas. I had a great many things to think about in those days. I had made out a list of questions and possible answers, but I seemed only to be working around in a circle. I always ended where I began. The list was something like this. Who had entered the house the night before the murder? Thomas claimed it was Mr. Bailey, whom he had seen on the footpath, and who owned the pearl cufflink. Why did Arnold Armstrong come back after he had left the house the night he was killed? No answer. Was it on the mission Louise had mentioned? Who admitted him? Gertrude said she had locked the east entry. There was no key on the dead man or in the door. He must have been admitted from within. who had been locked in the clothes chute. Someone unfamiliar with the house, evidently. Only 2 people missing from the household, Rosie and Gertrude. Rosie had been at the lodge. Therefore, but was it Gertrude? Might it not have been the mysterious intruder again? Who had accosted Rosie on the drive? Again, perhaps the nightly visitor. It seemed more likely someone who suspected a great secret at the lodge. Was Louise under surveillance? Who had passed Louise on the circular staircase? Could it have been Thomas? The key to the east entry made this a possibility. But why was he there, if it were indeed he? Who had made the hole in the trunk room wall? It was not vandalism. It had been done quietly and with deliberate purpose. If I had only known how to read the purpose of that gaping aperture, what I might have saved in anxiety and mental strain. Why had Louise left her people and come home to hide at the lodge? There was no answer, as yet, to this, or to the next questions. Why did both she and Dr. Walker warn us away from the house? Who was Lucian Wallace? What did Thomas see in the shadows the night he died? What was the meaning of the subtle change in Gertrude? Was Jack Bailey an accomplice or a victim in the looting of the Traders' Bank? What all-powerful reason made Louise determined to marry Dr. Walker? The examiners were still working on the books of the Traders' Bank, and it was probable that several weeks would elapse before everything was cleared up. The firm of expert accountants who had examined the books some 2 months before testified that every bond, every piece of valuable paper was there at that time. It had been shortly after their examination that the president, who had been in bad health, had gone to California. Mr. Bailey was still ill at the Knickerbocker, and in this, as in other ways, Gertrude's conduct puzzled me. She seemed indifferent, refused to discuss matters pertaining to the bank, and never, to my knowledge, either wrote to him or went to see him. Gradually, I came to the conclusion that Gertrude, with the rest of the world, believed her lover guilty, and, although I believed it myself, for that matter, I was irritated by her indifference. Girls in my day did not meekly accept the public's verdict as to the man they loved. But presently something occurred that made me think that under Gertrude's surface calm there was a seething flood of emotions. Tuesday morning the detective made a careful search of the grounds, but he found nothing. In the afternoon he disappeared, and it was late that night when he came home. He said he would have to go back to the city the following day, and arranged with Halsey and Alex to guard the house. Liddy came to me on Wednesday morning with her black silk apron held up like a bag, and her eyes big with virtuous wrath. It was the day of Thomas's funeral in the village, and Alex and I were in the conservatory cutting flowers for the old man's casket. Liddy is never so happy as when she is making herself wretched, and now her mouth drooped while her eyes were triumphant. "I always said there were plenty of things going on here, right under our noses, that we couldn't see," she said, holding out her apron. "I don't see with my nose," I remarked. "What have you got there?" Liddy pushed aside a half-dozen geranium pots, and in the space thus cleared she dumped the contents of her apron, a handful of tiny bits of paper. Alex had stepped back, but I saw him watching her curiously. "Wait a moment, Liddy," I said. "You have been going through the library paper basket again." Liddy was arranging her bits of paper with the skill of long practice and paid no attention. "Did it ever occur to you," I went on, putting my hand over the scraps, "that when people tear up their correspondence, it is for the express purpose of keeping it from being read?" "If they wasn't ashamed of it, they wouldn't take so much trouble, Miss Rachel," Liddy said oracularly. "More than that, with things happening every day, I consider it my duty. If you don't read and act on this, I shall give it to that Jamieson, and I'll venture he'll not go back to the city today." That decided me. If the scraps had anything to do with the mystery, ordinary conventions had no value. So Liddy arranged the scraps, like working out one of the puzzle pictures children play with, and she did it with much the same eagerness. When it was finished, she stepped aside while I read it. "Wednesday night, 9 o'clock, bridge," I read aloud. Then, aware of Alex's stare, I turned on Liddy. "Someone is to play bridge tonight at 9 o'clock, I said. "Is that your business or mine?" Liddy was aggrieved. She was about to reply when I scooped up the pieces and left the conservatory. "Now then," I said when we got outside, "will you tell me why you choose to take Alex into your confidence? He's no fool. Do you suppose he thinks anyone in this house is going to play bridge tonight at 9 o'clock by appointment? I suppose you have shown it in the kitchen, and instead of my being able to slip down to the bridge tonight quietly and see who is there, the whole household will be going in a procession." "Nobody knows it," Liddy said humbly. "I found it in the basket in Miss Gertrude's dressing room. Look at the back of the sheet." I turned over some of the scraps, and, sure enough, it was a blank deposit slip from the Traders' Bank. So Gertrude was going to meet Jack Bailey that night by the bridge, and I had thought he was ill. It hardly seemed like the action of an innocent man, this avoidance of daylight and of his fiancée's people. I decided to make certain, however, by going to the bridge that night. After luncheon, Mr. Jamieson suggested that I go with him to Richfield, and I consented. "I am inclined to place more faith in Dr. Stewart's story," he said, "since I found that scrap in old Thomas's pocket. It bears out the statement that the woman with the child and the woman who quarreled with Armstrong are the same. It looks as if Thomas had stumbled on to some affair which was more or less discreditable to the dead man, and, with a certain loyalty to the family, had kept it to himself. Then, you see, your story about the woman and the card-room window begins to mean something. It is the nearest approach to anything tangible that we have had yet." Warner took us to Richfield in the car. It was about 25 miles by railroad, but by taking a series of atrociously rough shortcuts we got there very quickly. It was a pretty little town, on the river, and back on the hill I could see the Mortons' big country house, where Halsey and Gertrude had been staying until the night of the murder. Elm Street was almost the only street, and number 14 was easily found. It was a small white house, dilapidated without having gained anything picturesque, with a low window and a porch only a foot or so above the bit of a lawn. There was a baby carriage in the path, and from a swing at the side came the sound of conflict. 3 small children were disputing vociferously, and a faded young woman with a kindly face was trying to hush the clamor. When she saw us, she untied her gingham apron and came around to the porch. "Good afternoon," I said. Jamieson lifted his hat without speaking. "I came to inquire about a child named Lucian Wallace." "I am glad you have come," she said. "In spite of the other children, I think the little fellow is lonely. We thought perhaps his mother would be here today." Mr. Jamieson stepped forward. "You are Mrs. Tate?" I wondered how the detective knew. "Yes, sir. Mrs. Tate, we want to make some inquiries, perhaps in the house. Come right in," she said hospitably. And soon we were in the little shabby parlor, exactly like 1,000 of its prototypes. Mrs. Tate sat uneasily, her hands folded in her lap. "How long has Lucian been here?" Mr. Jamieson asked. "Since a week ago last Friday. His mother paid 1 week's board in advance. The other has not been paid." "Was he ill when he came?" "No, sir, not what you'd call sick. He was getting better of typhoid," she said, "and he's picked up fine." "Will you tell me his mother's name and address?" "That's the trouble," the young woman said, knitting her brows. She gave the name as Mrs. Wallace and said she had no address. She was looking for a boarding house in town. She said she worked in a department store and couldn't take care of the child properly, and he needed fresh air and milk. I had 3 children of my own, and one more didn't make much difference in the work, but I wish she would pay this week's board. Did she say which store it was? No, sir, but all the boy's clothes came from King's. He has far too fine clothes for the country. There was a chorus of shouts and shrill yells from the front door, followed by the loud stamping of children's feet and a throaty "Whoa! Whoa!" Into the room came a tandem team of 2 chubby youngsters, a boy and a girl, harnessed with a clothesline, and driven by a laughing boy of about 7, in tan overalls and brass buttons. The small driver caught my attention at once. He was a beautiful child, and although he showed traces of recent severe illness, his skin had now the clear transparency of health. "Whoa, Flinders!" he shouted. "You're going to smash the trap!" Mr. Jamieson coaxed him over by holding out a lead pencil, striped blue and yellow. "Now then," he said, when the boy had taken the lead pencil and was testing its usefulness on the detective's cuff. "Now then, I'll bet you don't know what your name is." "I do," said the boy. "Lucian Wallace." "Great. And what's your mother's name?" "Mother, of course. What's your mother's name?" And he pointed to me. "I am going to stop wearing black. It doubles a woman's age." "And where did you live before you came here?" The detective was polite enough not to smile. "Grossmutter," he said, and I saw Mr. Jamieson's eyebrows go up. "German," he commented. "Well, young man, you don't seem to know much about yourself." "I've tried it all week," Mrs. Tate broke in. "The boy knows a word or 2 of German, but he doesn't know where he lived or anything about himself." Mr. Jamieson wrote something on a card and gave it to her. "Mrs. Tate," he said, "I want you to do something. Here's some money for the telephone call. The instant the boy's mother appears here, call up that number and ask for the person whose name is there. You can run across to the drugstore on an errand and do it quietly. Just say, 'The lady has come.'" "The lady has come," repeated Mrs. Tate. "Very well, sir, and I hope it will be soon. The milk bill alone is almost double what it was." "How much is the child's board?" I asked. $3 a week, including his washing." "Very well," I said. "Now, Mrs. Tate, I am going to pay last week's board and a week in advance. If the mother comes, she is to know nothing of this visit, absolutely not a word, and, in return for your silence, you may use this money for something for your own children." Her tired, faded face lighted up, and I saw her glance at the little Tate's small feet. Shoes, I divined, the feet of the genteel poor being almost as expensive as their stomachs. As we went back, Mr. Jamieson made only one remark. I think he was laboring under the weight of a great disappointment. "Is King's a children's outfitting place?" he asked. "Not especially. It is a general department store." He was silent after that, but he went to the telephone as soon as we got home and called up King and Company in the city. After a time he got the general manager, and they talked for some time. When Mr. Jamieson hung up the receiver, he turned to me. "The plot thickens," he said with his ready smile. "There are 4 women named Wallace at King's, none of them married, and none over 20. I think I shall go up to the city tonight. I want to go to the children's hospital, but before I go, Miss Innes, I wish you would be more frank with me than you have been yet. I want you to show me the revolver you picked up in the tulip bed." So he had known all along. "It was a revolver, Mr. Jamieson," I admitted, cornered at last, "but I cannot show it to you. It is not in my possession." Chapter 22. A Ladder Out of Place. At dinner, Mr. Jamieson suggested sending a man out in his place for a couple of days, but Halsey was certain there would be nothing more, and felt that he and Alex could manage the situation. The detective went back to town early in the evening, and by 9 o'clock Halsey, who had been playing golf, as a man does anything to take his mind away from trouble, was sleeping soundly on the big leather davenport in the living room. I sat and knitted, pretending not to notice when Gertrude got up and wandered out into the starlight. As soon as I was satisfied that she had gone, however, I went out cautiously. I had no intention of eavesdropping, but I wanted to be certain that it was Jack Bailey she was meeting. Too many things had occurred in which Gertrude was, or appeared to be, involved, to allow anything to be left in question. I went slowly across the lawn, skirted the hedge to a break not far from the lodge, and found myself on the open road. Perhaps 100 feet to the left the path led across the valley to the country club, and only a little way off was the footbridge over Casanova Creek. But just as I was about to turn down the path, I heard steps coming toward me, and I shrank into the bushes. It was Gertrude, going back quickly toward the house. I was surprised. I waited until she had had time to get almost to the house before I started, and then I stepped back again into the shadows. The reason why Gertrude had not kept her tryst was evident. Leaning on the parapet of the bridge, and in the moonlight, and smoking a pipe, was Alex, the gardener. I could have throttled Liddy for her carelessness in reading the torn note where he could hear, and I could cheerfully have choked Alex to death for his audacity. But there was no help for it. I turned and followed Gertrude slowly back to the house. The frequent invasions of the house had effectually prevented any relaxation after dusk. We had redoubled our vigilance as to bolts and window locks, but, as Mr. Jamieson had suggested, we allowed the door at the east entry to remain as before, locked by the Yale lock only. To provide only one possible entrance for the invader, and to keep a constant guard in the dark at the foot of the circular staircase, seemed to be the only method. In absence of the detective, Alex and Halsey arranged to change off. Halsey to be on duty from 10 to 2, and Alex from 2 until 6. Each man was armed, and, as an additional precaution, the one off duty slept in a room near the head of the circular staircase, and kept his door open to be ready for emergency. These arrangements were carefully kept from the servants, who were only commencing to sleep at night, and who retired, one and all, with barred doors and lamps that burned full until morning. The house was quiet again Wednesday night. It was almost a week since Louise had encountered someone on the stairs, and it was 4 days since the discovery of the hole in the trunk-room wall. Arnold Armstrong and his father rested side by side in the Casanova churchyard, and at the Zion African Church, on the hill, a new mound marked the last resting place of poor Thomas. Louise was with her mother in town, and, beyond a polite note of thanks to me, we had heard nothing from her. Dr. Walker had taken up his practice again, and we saw him now and then flying past along the road, always at top speed. The murder of Arnold Armstrong was still unavenged, and I remained firm in the position that I had taken, to stay at Sunnyside until the thing was at least partly cleared. And yet, for all its quiet, it was on Wednesday night that perhaps the boldest attempt was made to enter the house. On Thursday afternoon the laundress sent word she would like to speak to me, and I saw her in my private sitting room, a small room beyond the dressing room. Mary Ann was embarrassed. She had rolled down her sleeves and tied a white apron around her waist, and she stood making folds in it with fingers that were red and shiny from her soap suds. "Well, Mary," I said encouragingly, "what's the matter? Don't dare to tell me the soap is out." "No, ma'am, Miss Innes. She had a nervous habit of looking first at my one eye and then at the other, her own optics shifting ceaselessly, right eye, left eye, right eye, until I found myself doing the same thing. "No, ma'am, I wasn't asking, I was asking, did you want the ladder left up the clothes chute?" "The what?" I screeched, and was sorry the next minute. Seeing her suspicions were verified, Marianne had gone white, and stood with her eyes shifting more wildly than ever. "There's a ladder up the clothes chute, Miss Innes," she said. "It's up that tight I can't move it, and I didn't like to ask for help until I spoke to you." It was useless to dissemble. Marianne knew now as well as I did that the ladder had no business to be there. I did the best I could, however. I put her on the defensive at once. "Then you didn't lock the laundry last night?" "I locked it tight, and I put the key in the kitchen on its nail." "Very well, then you forgot a window." Marianne hesitated. "Yes'm," she said at last. "I thought I locked them all, but there was one open this morning." I went out of the room and down the hall, followed by Marianne. The door into the clothes chute was securely bolted, and when I opened it, I saw the evidence of the woman's story. A pruning ladder had been brought from where it had lain against the stable, and now stood upright in the clothes shaft, its end resting against the wall between the first and second floors. I turned to Mary. "This is due to your carelessness," I said. "If we had all been murdered in our beds, it would have been your fault." She shivered. "Now, not a word of this through the house, and send Alex to me." The effect on Alex was to make him apoplectic with rage, and with it all I fancied, there was an element of satisfaction. As I look back, so many things are plain to me that I wonder I could not see at the time. It is all known now, and yet the whole thing was so remarkable that perhaps my stupidity was excusable. Alex leaned down the chute and examined the ladder carefully. "It is caught," he said with a grim smile. "The fools, to have left a warning like that. The only trouble is, Miss Innes, they won't be apt to come back for a while." "I shouldn't regard that in the light of a calamity," I replied. Until late that evening, Halsey and Alex worked at the chute. They forced down the ladder at last, and put a new bolt on the door. As for myself, I sat and wondered if I had a deadly enemy intent on my destruction. I was growing more and more nervous. Liddy had given up all pretense at bravery and slept regularly in my dressing room on the couch, with a prayer book and a game knife from the kitchen under her pillow, thus preparing for both the natural and the supernatural. That was the way things stood that Thursday night, when I myself took a hand in the struggle. Chapter 23. While the Stables Burned. About 9 o'clock that night, Liddy came into the living room and reported that one of the housemaids declared she had seen 2 men slip around the corner of the stable. Gertrude had been sitting staring in front of her, jumping at every sound. Now she turned on Liddy pettishly. "I declare, Liddy," she said, "you are a bundle of nerves. What if Eliza did see some men around the stable? It may have been Warner and Alex." "Warner is in the kitchen, miss," Liddy said with dignity, "and if you had come through what I have, you would be a bundle of nerves too. Miss Rachel, I'd be thankful if you'd give me my month's wages tomorrow. I'll be going to my sister's." "Very well," I said, to her evident amazement. "I will make out the check. Warner can take you down to the noon train." Liddy's face was really funny. "You'll have a nice time at your sister's," I went on. 5 children, hasn't she?" "That's it," Liddy said, suddenly bursting into tears. "Send me away, after all these years, and your new shawl only half done, and nobody knowing how to fix the water for your bath." "It's time I learned to prepare my own bath," I was knitting complacently. But Gertrude got up and put her arms around Liddy's shaking shoulders. "You are two big babies," she said soothingly. "Neither one of you could get along for an hour without the other. So stop quarreling and be good, Liddy. Go right up and lay out Auntie's night things. She's going to bed early." After Liddy had gone, I began to think about the men at the stable, and I grew more and more anxious. Halsey was aimlessly knocking the billiard balls around in the billiard room, and I called to him. "Halsey," I said when he sauntered in, "is there a policeman in Casanova?" "Constable," he said laconically. "Veteran of the war, one arm, in office to conciliate the GAR element. Why?" "Because I am uneasy tonight," and I told him what Liddy had said. "Is there any one you can think of who could be relied on to watch the outside of the house tonight?" "We might get Sam Bohannon from the club," he said thoughtfully. "It wouldn't be a bad scheme. He's a smart darky, and with his mouth shut and his shirt front covered, you couldn't see him a yard off in the dark." Halsey conferred with Alex, and the result, in an hour, was Sam. His instructions were simple. There had been numerous attempts to break into the house. It was the intention not to drive intruders away, but to capture them. If Sam saw anything suspicious outside, he was to tap at the east entry, where Alex and Halsey were to alternate in keeping watch through the night. It was with a comfortable feeling of security that I went to bed that night. The door between Gertrude's rooms and mine had been opened, and, with the doors into the hall bolted, we were safe enough. Although Liddy persisted in her belief that doors would prove no obstacles to our disturbers. As before, Halsey watched the east entry from 10 until 2. He had an eye to comfort, and he kept vigil in a heavy oak chair, very large and deep. We went upstairs rather early, and through the open door Gertrude and I kept up a running fire of conversation. Liddy was brushing my hair, and Gertrude was doing her own, with a long free sweep of her strong round arms. "Did you know Mrs. Armstrong and Louise are in the village?" she called. "No," I replied, startled. "How did you hear about it?" "I met the older Stewart girl today, the doctor's daughter, and she told me they had not gone back to town after the funeral. They went directly to that little yellow house next to Dr. Walker's, and are apparently settled there. They took the house furnished for the summer." "Why, it's a bandbox," I said. "I can't imagine Fanny Armstrong in such a place." "It's true, nevertheless. Ella Stewart says Mrs. Armstrong has aged terribly, and looks as if she is hardly able to walk." I lay and thought over some of these things until midnight. The electric lights went out then, fading slowly until there was only a red-hot loop to be seen in the bulb, and then even that died away, and we were embarked on the darkness of another night. Apparently, only a few minutes elapsed, during which my eyes were becoming accustomed to the darkness. Then I noticed that the windows were reflecting a faint pinkish light. Liddy noticed it at the same time, and I heard her jump up. At that moment, Sam's deep voice boomed from somewhere just below. "Fire!" he yelled. "The stable's on fire!" I could see him in the glare, dancing up and down on the drive, and a moment later Halsey joined him. Alex was awake and running down the stairs, and in 5 minutes from the time the fire was discovered, 3 of the maids were sitting on their trunks in the drive, although, excepting a few sparks, there was no fire nearer than 100 yards. Gertrude seldom loses her presence of mind, and she ran to the telephone. But by the time the Casanova volunteer fire department came toiling up the hill, the stable was a furnace, with the dragonfly safe but blistered in the road. Some gasoline exploded just as the volunteer department got to work, which shook their nerves as well as the burning building. The stable, being on a hill, was a torch to attract the population from every direction. Rumor had it that Sunnyside was burning, and it was amazing how many people threw something over their nightclothes and flew to the conflagration. I take it Casanova has few fires, and Sunnyside was furnishing the people, in one way and another, the greatest excitement they had had for years. The stable was off the west wing. I hardly know how I came to think of the circular staircase and the unguarded door at its foot. Liddy was putting my clothes into sheets, preparatory to tossing them out the window, when I found her, and I could hardly persuade her to stop. "I want you to come with me, Liddy," I said. "Bring a candle and a couple of blankets." She lagged behind considerably when she saw me making for the east wing, and at the top of the staircase she balked. "I'm not going down there," she said firmly. "There's no one guarding the door down there," I explained. "Who knows? This may be a scheme to draw everybody away from this end of the house and let someone in here." The instant I had said it, I was convinced I had hit on the explanation, and that perhaps it was already too late. It seemed to me as I listened that I heard stealthy footsteps on the east porch, but there was so much shouting outside that it was impossible to tell. Liddy was on the point of retreat. "Very well," I said, "then I shall go down alone. Run back to Mr. Halsey's room and get his revolver. Don't shoot down the stairs if you hear a noise. Remember, I shall be down there. And hurry." I put the candle on the floor at the top of the staircase and took off my bedroom slippers. Then I crept down the stairs, going very slowly and listening with all my ears. I was keyed to such a pitch that I felt no fear, like the condemned who sleep and eat the night before execution. I was no longer able to suffer apprehension. I was past that. Just at the foot of the stairs I stubbed my toe against Halsey's big chair, and had to stand on one foot in a soundless agony until the pain subsided to a dull ache. And then I knew I was right. Someone had put a key into the lock and was turning it. For some reason it refused to work, and the key was withdrawn. There was a second muttering of voices outside. I had only a second. Another trial, and the door would open. The candle above made a faint gleam down the well-like staircase, and at that moment, with a second, no more, to spare, I thought of a plan. The heavy oak chair almost filled the space between the newel post and the door. With a crash, I had turned it on its side, wedging it against the door, its legs against the stairs. I could hear a faint scream from Liddy at the crash, and then she came down the stairs on a run, with the revolver held straight out in front of her. "Thank God," she said in a shaking voice. "I thought it was you." I pointed to the door, and she understood. "Call out the windows at the other end of the house," I whispered. "Run. Tell them not to wait for anything." She went up the stairs at that, 2 at a time. Evidently she collided with the candle, for it went out, and I was left in darkness. I was really astonishingly cool. I remember stepping over the chair and gluing my ear to the door, and I shall never forget feeling it give an inch or two there in the darkness under a steady pressure from without. But the chair held, although I could hear an ominous cracking in one of its legs, and then, without the slightest warning, the card-room window broke with a crash. I had my finger on the trigger of the revolver, and as I jumped it went off, right through the door. Someone outside swore roundly, and for the first time I could hear what was said. "Only a scratch. Men are at the other end of the house. Have the whole rat's nest on us." And a lot of profanity which I won't write down. The voices were at the broken window now, and although I was trembling violently, I was determined that I would hold them until help came. I moved up the stairs until I could see into the card-room, or rather through it, to the window. As I looked, a small man put his leg over the sill and stepped into the room. The curtain confused him for a moment, Then he turned, not toward me, but toward the billiard room door. I fired again, and something that was glass or china crashed to the ground. Then I ran up the stairs and along the corridor to the main staircase. Gertrude was standing there, trying to locate the shots, and I must have been a peculiar figure, with my hair in crimps, my dressing gown flying, no slippers, and a revolver clutched in my hands. I had no time to talk. There was the sound of footsteps in the lower hall, and someone bounded up the stairs. I had gone berserk, I think. I leaned over the stair rail and fired again. Halsey, below, yelled at me. "What are you doing up there?" he yelled. "You missed me by an inch." And then I collapsed and fainted. When I came around, Liddy was rubbing my temples with eau de quinine, and the search was in full blast. Well, the man was gone. The stable burned to the ground, while a crowd cheered at every falling rafter, and the volunteer fire department sprayed it with a garden hose. And in the house, Alex and Halsey searched every corner of the lower floor, finding no one. The truth of my story was shown by the broken window and the overturned chair. That the unknown had got upstairs was almost impossible. He had not used the main staircase. There was no way to the upper floor in the east wing, and Liddy had been at the window in the west wing, where the servants' stair went up. But we did not go to bed at all. Sam Bohannon and Warner helped in the search, and not a closet escaped scrutiny. Even the cellars were given a thorough overhauling, without result. The door in the east entry had a hole through it where my bullet had gone. The hole slanted downward, and the bullet was embedded in the porch. Some reddish stains showed it had done execution. "Somebody will walk lame," Halsey said when he had marked the course of the bullet. "It's too low to have hit anything but a leg or foot." From that time on, I watched every person I met for a limp, and to this day the man who halts in his walk is an object of suspicion to me. But Casanova had no lame men. The nearest approach to it was an old fellow who tended the safety gates at the railroad, and he, I learned on inquiry, had 2 artificial legs. Our man had gone, and the large and expensive stable at Sunnyside was a heap of smoking rafters and charred boards. Warner swore the fire was incendiary, and in view of the attempt to enter the house, there seemed to be no doubt about it. Chapter 24. Flinders. If Halsey had only taken me fully into his confidence through the whole affair, it would have been much simpler. If he had been altogether frank about Jack Bailey, and if the day after the fire he had told me what he suspected, there would have been no harrowing period for all of us with the boy in danger. But young people refuse to profit by the experience of their elders, and sometimes their elders are the ones to suffer. I was much used up the day after the fire, and Gertrude insisted on my going out. The machine was temporarily out of commission, and the carriage horses had been sent to a farm for the summer. Gertrude finally got a trap from the Casanova liveryman, and we went out. Just as we turned from the drive into the road, we passed a woman. She had put down a small valise and stood inspecting the house and grounds minutely. I should hardly have noticed her, had it not been for the fact that she had been horribly disfigured by smallpox. "Ugh," Gertrude said when we had passed. "What a face! I shall dream of it tonight. Get up, Flinders." "Flinders?" I asked. "Is that the horse's name?" "It is." She flicked the horse's stubby mane with the whip. He didn't look like a livery horse, and the liveryman said he had bought him from the Armstrongs when he had purchased a couple of motors and cut down the stable. "Nice Flinders, a good old boy." Flinders was certainly not a common name for a horse. and yet the youngster at Richfield had named his prancing, curly-haired little horse Flinders. It set me to thinking. At my request, Halsey had already sent word of the fire to the agent from whom we had secured the house. Also, he had called Mr. Jamieson by telephone, and somewhat guardedly had told him of the previous night's events. Mr. Jamieson promised to come out that night, and to bring another man with him. I did not consider it necessary to notify Mrs. Armstrong in the village. No doubt she knew of the fire, and in view of my refusal to give up the house, an interview would probably have been unpleasant enough. But as we passed Dr. Walker's white and green house, I thought of something. "Stop here, Gertrude," I said. "I'm going to get out." "To see Louise?" she asked. "No, I want to ask this young Walker something." She was curious, I knew, but I did not wait to explain. I went up the walk to the house, where a brass sign at the side announced the office, and went in. The reception room was empty, but from the consulting room beyond came the sound of two voices, not very amicable. "It is an outrageous figure," someone was storming. Then the doctor's quiet tone, evidently not arguing, merely stating something. But I had not time to listen to some person probably disputing his bill, so I coughed. The voices ceased at once. A door closed somewhere, and the doctor entered from the hall of the house. He looked sufficiently surprised at seeing me. "Good afternoon, doctor," I said formally. "I shall not keep you from your patient. I wish merely to ask you a question." "Won't you sit down?" "It will not be necessary. Doctor, has anyone come to you, either early this morning or today, to have you treat a bullet wound?" "Nothing so startling has happened to me," he said. "A bullet wound? Things must be lively at Sunnyside." "I didn't say it was at Sunnyside, but as it happens, it was. If any such case comes to you, will it be too much trouble for you to let me know?" "I shall be only too happy," he said. "I understand you have had a fire up there, too. A fire and shooting in one night is rather lively for a quiet place like that." "It is as quiet as a boiler shop," I replied as I turned to go. "And you are still going to stay?" "Until I am burned out," I responded, and then, on my way down the steps, I turned around suddenly. "Doctor," I asked in a venture, "have you ever heard of a child named Lucien Wallace?" Clever as he was, his face changed and stiffened. He was on his guard again in a moment. "Lucien Wallace," he repeated. "No, I think not. There are plenty of Wallaces around, but I don't know any Lucien." I was as certain as possible that he did. People do not lie readily to me, and this man lied beyond a doubt. But there was nothing to be gained now. His defenses were up, and I left, half irritated and wholly baffled. Our reception was entirely different at Dr. Stewart's. Taken into the bosom of the family at once, Flinders tied outside and nibbling grass at the roadside, Gertrude and I drank some homemade elderberry wine and told briefly of the fire. Of the more serious part of the night's experience, of course, we said nothing. But when at last we had left the family on the porch, and the good doctor was untying our steed, I asked him the same question I had put to Dr. Walker. "Shot," he said. "Bless my soul, no. Why, what have you been doing up at the big house, Miss Innes?" "Someone tried to enter the house during the fire, and was shot and slightly injured," I said hastily. "Please don't mention it. We wish to make as little out of it as possible." There was one other possibility, and we tried that. At Casanova Station, I saw the station master, and I asked him if any trains left Casanova between 1 o'clock and daylight. There was none until 6 a.m. The next question required more diplomacy. "Did you notice on the 6 o'clock train any man, who limped a little?" I asked. Please try to remember. We are trying to trace a man who has been loitering around Sunnyside last night before the fire." He was all attention in a moment. I was up there myself at the fire," he said volubly. "I'm a member of the volunteer company. First big fire we've had since the summer house burned down over to the club golf links. My wife was saying the other day, 'Dave, you might as well have saved the money in that there helmet and shirt.' And here last night, they came in handy. Rang that bell so hard I hadn't time scarcely to get 'em on." "And did you see a man who limped?" Gertrude put in as he stopped for breath. "Not at the train, ma'am," he said. "No such person got on here today. But I'll tell you where I did see a man that limped. I didn't wait until the fire company left. There's a fast freight goes through at 4:45, and I had to get down to the station. I seen there wasn't much more to do anyhow at the fire. We'd got the flames under control." Gertrude looked at me and smiled. "So I started down the hill. There was folks here and there going home, and along by the path to the country club I seen two men. One was a short fellow. He was sitting on a big rock, his back to me, and he had something white in his hand, as if he was tying up his foot. After I'd gone on a piece, I looked back, and he was hobbling on, and, excuse me, miss, he was swearing something sickening." "Did they go toward the club?" Gertrude asked suddenly, leaning forward. "No, miss. I think they came into the village. I didn't get a look at their faces, but I know every chick and child in this place, and everybody knows me. When they didn't shout at me, in my uniform, you know, I took it they were strangers." So all we had for our afternoon's work was this. Someone had been shot by the bullet that went through the door. He had not left the village, and he had not called in a physician. Also, Dr. Walker knew who Lucienne Wallace was, and his very denial made me confident that, in that one direction at least, we were on the right track. The thought that the detective would be there that night was the most cheering thing of all, and I think even Gertrude was glad of it. Driving home that afternoon, I saw her in the clear sunlight for the first time in several days, and I was startled to see how ill she looked. She was thin and colorless, and all her bright animation was gone. "Gertrude," I said, "I've been a very selfish old woman. You are going to leave this miserable house tonight. Annie Morton is going to Scotland next week, and you shall go right with her." To my surprise, she flushed painfully. "I don't want to go, Aunt Ray," she said. "Don't make me leave now." "You are losing your health and your good looks," I said decidedly. "You should have a change." "I shan't stir a foot." She was equally decided. Then, more lightly, "Why, you and Liddy need me to arbitrate between you every day of the week." Perhaps I was growing suspicious of everyone, but it seemed to me that Gertrude's gaiety was forced and artificial. I watched her covertly during the rest of the drive, and I did not like the 2 spots of crimson in her pale cheeks. But I said nothing more about sending her to Scotland. I knew she would not go. And I suppose that's a good time to stop. Oh no, feels a bit on the short side, but we did get through 4 more chapters. I feel like I was reading a bit faster than might have previous times. Maybe I just have more energy tonight. Interesting. We get to see more of Detective Jamieson and Miss Innes working together. Or also her hiding information from him. Yeah, this book keeps adding more and more layers without answering many questions. So far. I'm sure it'll all make sense in the end, within less than 100 pages. Well, suppose I should wrap up for the night. Find somewhere to send you chaps off to. As for what's coming up in the near future, on Wednesday, we'll be continuing Doom 2, Hell on Earth. Demon splattering goodness in 3D. And Saturday, we'll be playing several short horror games for Short Horror Saturday. I believe I'm going to play several by the same several games by the same developer, whose name and games names now escape me. But they're all safely downloaded on my hard drive, pending me trying them out and making sure they work. And on Sunday, of course, we'll continue Blackwell Epiphany. And I don't know, it's conceivable. I don't think we'll finish it this week. I think we've got 2 streams left in it, maybe more. It's always hard to tell. I better try and figure that out. Maybe look at a Let's Play and see, get to approximately the part where I was and then see what percentage of it remains. That's how I usually do it when I'm trying to gauge how much I have left. Either look at a Let's Play or a walkthrough on Game Boomers or Game Zebo without going further than in the walkthrough than where I've made it to in the game. Who's online? My homepage has no idea what kind of news stories or ads I'm actually interested in. Hey, bruh man, welcome in. I don't know if I would say I'm the first detective on the block. I do enjoy a good mystery, but I'm certainly no closer to solving the mystery in this book. But then, I wouldn't think they would want us to figure it out before everything is revealed in the last couple of chapters. Because then we might not buy the next issue of the magazine in which the story appears. Which wouldn't have been worth that, or wouldn't have cost that much back in 1908, but one must adjust for inflation. And I hope you're having a good night, bruh man. Who reads books in 2023? I still enjoy books, especially large print ones. So I find it a good way to pass the time on the bus to and from work. Who's playing what? Let's see. Yes, I'm being followed by a Twitch viewer. Thank you so much for the follow, bro, man. Welcome to the community. Really appreciate it. Yeah, appreciate you making it in for the audiobook stream. We're just wrapping up now. Is someone we're going to raid that we haven't in a while? Maybe. Yeah, we raided her not that long ago. Let's go ahead and raid. And let's raid Yaden RMP, who's a professional wrestler, and judging by his stream title, I think he recently had his wisdom teeth removed, or will be having his wisdom teeth removed. So, oh, thank you so much for the contribution to the community challenge, man. Appreciate it. Yeah. I think if that comes to fruition, that'll be fun. Yeah, let's raid Mercury Yaden. And the raid calls just say oh no, has your wisdom stat decreased by 4? Hopefully you'll find that humorous. Thank you everybody for coming out to another one of the bonus streams with audiobooks. Whether you're chatting or lurking, I appreciate you being here. You can find me on Twitter and MySpace, where I post stream announcements, polls, random thoughts and jokes, and, in general, probably not enough. And you can find VODs of all my past streams on YouTube, minus the last couple of weeks, because I've never quite caught up. I hope that you all have a good night, and that your dreams make a lot more sense than the circular staircase at this point. And I'll see you guys on Wednesday for Doom 2, and please say hi to Mercury Yaden.